She had 30 seconds before the man in front of her ended her career, and she spent 29 of them trying to decide if it was worth fighting for. The emergency ward at Redwood Valley Medical Center smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee, and the particular kind of institutional despair that accumulates in places where people are always either waiting or being waited on. Emily Carter stood in the middle of it, still in her scrubs, a clipboard pressed against her chest like a shield that wasn't going to stop anything. Director Harlan Voss stood 6 feet away with his arms crossed and his jaw set and the expression of a man who had already made his decision before he walked into the room. "Turn in your badge," he said. "You're done here." The words landed flat. Not dramatic, not cruel, just final, the way a door closing in an empty house sounds final. Behind her, 2 nurses pretended to be busy with a medication cart they'd already sorted twice. The charge nurse, Delia Okafor, stood at the station with her eyes fixed on her computer screen, her shoulders pulled in like she was trying to take up less space. Nobody was going to say anything. Emily had known that before Voss opened his mouth. She unclipped her badge from her chest pocket and set it on the counter. "The patient in Bay 4 needs her IV line checked in 20 minutes. The potassium's running slow." Voss looked at the badge. He didn't pick it up. "That's not your concern anymore." "It's someone's concern." "Carter." He said her name like a warning. "Don't make this into something it isn't." She wanted to ask him what it was exactly, if not what it looked like. A man who'd never worked a shift below administrative level telling a nurse with 6 years on the floor that she'd violated protocol. The protocol in question was a documentation requirement she'd flagged as inadequate 3 weeks ago in writing, which Voss had signed off on without reading. She knew that. He knew that. The difference between them was that only one of them was going to pretend otherwise. She picked up her stethoscope from around her neck, coiled it once, set it next to the badge. "Have a good evening," she said. She walked toward the staff exit and didn't look at Delia and didn't look at the medication cart nurses and didn't stop when she heard Voss say something behind her that she was pretty sure was meant to be heard. The doors swung open and the October air came in cold and she stood on the sidewalk outside the ambulance bay and let herself feel it for exactly 1 minute. Then she started walking toward her car. The city of Ashford sat in a crease between 2 ridge lines, the kind of geography that made people feel contained without understanding why. Redwood Valley Medical Center was the largest hospital within 60 miles, which meant it was also, in the way of things that have no real competition, somewhat mediocre in ways that nobody who ran it had to confront directly. It had good equipment and an underpaid staff and a board of directors who cared deeply about quarterly reports, and an administration that had, over the past 4 years under Voss and his direct supervisor, a woman named Patricia Stroud, developed a particular talent for making problems disappear by reclassifying them. Emily had been there for 3 of those 4 years. She'd been hired out of a gap on her resume she'd described in the interview as a period of independent travel and recovery, which was technically accurate if you were willing to interpret every word in it loosely. The hiring manager hadn't pressed. She was qualified, she was available, and she was willing to work the overnight rotation that nobody else wanted. She'd been working nights ever since. She lived alone in a second-floor apartment on the east side of Ashford, 12 minutes from the hospital by the route that avoided the school zone. The apartment had good light in the morning, which she rarely saw, and a kitchen she cooked in more than people assumed, and a shelf in the bedroom closet with a locked box on it that she never opened in front of anyone. She had a neighbor named Gus who was 73 and bred orchids and always knocked twice before sliding notes under her door about packages she'd missed. She had a savings account she added to every month with the same discipline she applied to everything else in her life. Not because she was planning for something specific, but because she had learned a long time ago that the worst moments always came without warning and it was better to be ready. She got home at 8:47 p.m. She made tea. She didn't drink. She sat at the kitchen table for a while. Outside, an ambulance passed going in the direction of the hospital, and she listened to it until she couldn't hear it anymore. She was not all right, but she was used to not being all right, and she knew the difference between a wound that needed immediate attention and one that would heal on its own if you didn't pick at it. She went to bed at 10. The call came at 2:16 a.m. She knew the number because she'd saved it 3 years ago in a contact labeled Delia Hospital, and she'd received exactly 4 calls from it before tonight, all of them work-related, none of them good news. She picked up on the second ring. I know you're not supposed to, Delia started. What's happening? We have a situation. A pause. She could hear the ward in the background. Not panicked, but pressurized. The particular acoustic quality of a space where everyone is moving faster than they're letting on. A woman came in about 40 minutes ago. Trauma case, brought in by a private vehicle. No ID, no emergency contact. She was conscious when she arrived, but she's been deteriorating and nobody can figure out... Another pause. Emily, I've seen some things tonight that I don't know how to explain. Emily sat up. What kind of things? The woman has markings on her left forearm. I thought they were tattoos, but they're not. They look more like notation, like a code or something. And her clothing. Delia's voice dropped. She was wearing a compression suit under street clothes, the kind I've only ever seen in... I don't even know where I've seen it. I looked it up and I couldn't find it. Emily was already out of bed. Who's the attending? Dr. Fenwick, but he keeps dismissing it. He's treating it as a straightforward chest trauma, and I've tried twice to flag the other symptoms, and he looked at me like I was... She stopped. I know Voss sent you home. I know I'm not supposed to call. But something is wrong here, and I don't know what it is, and I think you might. Emily had her work boots in her hand. She sat on the edge of the bed and put them on without tying them. The notation on the forearm, she said. Alphanumeric or symbolic? A beat. How did you know it was alphanumeric? Delia. Is she showing respiratory irregularity? Not distress. Irregularity. Uneven cycle. Yes. Dr. Fenwick says it's anxiety. It's not anxiety. Emily tied her left boot, then the right. Don't let him push fluids past the standard protocol. Don't let anyone move her until I get there. Tell them whatever you need to tell them. Tell Fenwick you're concerned about a liability issue. Tell him you saw something in the blood work. I don't care. 12 minutes. She hung up without waiting for a response. Sam, it was closer to 10. She drove faster than she should have and parked in the ambulance bay because she didn't have time for anything else, and walked through the emergency entrance with her civilian jacket over her scrubs and her old badge, the one she'd been given in her first month and never turned in when they'd issued the new design, clipped to her pocket. The guard at the front desk looked up. She looked back. He made the calculation that most people in service positions make when they encounter someone who moves with sufficient certainty, which is that they probably belong. And he looked back down at his screen. The ward was the controlled chaos she'd heard in Delia's background. 2 other traumas, a family, and one of the side rooms having a loud disagreement about something. The medication cart finally where it should have been. Delia appeared at her elbow within 30 seconds. Fenwick doesn't know you're here. Let's keep it that way for a minute. Emily moved toward Bay 7, where the curtain was half drawn. Tell me what she looked like when she came in. Alert but confused. She kept asking for someone. A name. I couldn't make it out. She was holding her left arm close to her body, not because it was injured, like she was protecting something on it. The notation. Yes. Emily stopped outside the curtain. Through the gap, she could see the partial outline of the woman in the bed. Somewhere between 40 and 50, strong build, the kind of physical conditioning that didn't come from a gym. Her color was wrong. Not the gray of blood loss. Something else. What did Talk say? Clean. Fenwick says clean anyway, but Emily... Delia touched her arm. The compression suit. I saved a photo. It had a tag I've never seen before. I ran the manufacturer number, and it doesn't exist in any commercial database. Emily looked at her. Show me. Delia pulled out her phone. The image was slightly blurred but clear enough. Emily looked at the tag for 3 seconds, and then handed the phone back and kept her face very still. Okay, she said. What is it? Get me a chart, and find out if anyone's called an external number since she came in. Anyone on staff, anyone from admin, anyone. Emily, what is it? She pulled the curtain back and stepped into the bay. Musset. Up close, the woman was worse than she'd looked from the gap. Her breathing had the uneven cadence Emily had identified from Delia's description. 2 shallow, 1 deep, a hesitation, repeat, which was not a pattern any standard trauma presentation produced. Her forearm lay outside the blanket, and the notation was exactly what Emily had expected, a sequence of alphanumeric characters written in permanent marker, the kind of marker that came in a specific set that Emily had not seen since she'd stopped being the person who needed to see it. She was also conscious. Her eyes were open, and she was tracking. "Hey," Emily said quietly, in the tone she used with patients who were afraid but not lost. "I'm going to take your pulse and look at a few things. Is that okay?" The woman looked at her. She had brown eyes that were very clear despite everything else that was wrong. Her lips moved. Emily leaned in. "Renner," the woman said, just the one word, barely audible. "Tell Renner." Emily straightened up slowly. She put her fingers on the woman's wrist and counted. The pulse was there, but erratic in a way that had a pattern to it, which was worse than an irregular pulse, not better. "Do you know who sent you here?" Emily asked, in the same quiet tone. The woman's eyes moved to her arm, then back to Emily. "Can I see this?" Emily asked, touching the woman's forearm gently, the notation side up. The woman didn't pull away. Emily looked at the sequence for a long time. Her face gave nothing. Inside, the part of her that she'd spent 3 years convincing herself was dormant was going through the notation, the way you might go through the steps of a procedure you've performed so many times that your body begins doing it before your mind catches up. She knew the format. She knew the convention. She knew what the fourth character grouping meant in the classification system it came from, and she knew that the last 4 digits corresponded to a specific kind of operation with a specific kind of risk profile. She also knew that if she was reading it correctly, the woman in this bed was not just in medical danger. "I need to look at your back," she said. "I'm going to help you sit forward just slightly. This may be uncomfortable." She helped the woman lean forward and lifted the hospital gown carefully. The bruising on her mid-back was not from impact. The pattern was pressure-related, the kind that developed from extended wear of a specific equipment configuration, and there were 2 small marks at the base of her shoulder blades that Emily had to look at twice before she was certain she wasn't constructing them out of expectation. She was not. She settled the woman back against the pillow and stood up and breathed once. "I'm going to get your doctor and make sure we have the right setup for you," she said. "You don't need to do anything except stay as still as you can, all right?" The woman looked at her. Her lips moved again. "Are you her?" the woman said. Emily didn't answer that. She stepped out of the bay and walked directly to the nurse's station and found Delia. "The fluids," she said. "Where are they?" "Hanging. Fenwick ordered, stop them. Right now. Don't let anything else go in until I've talked to him." She turned. "Where is he?" "Break room." She found Fenwick in the break room with a cup of coffee and his phone, which he put face down when she walked in, which told her what she needed to know about how occupied he was with the patient in Bay 7. He was 48, competent in the way of people who peaked 15 years ago and had been operating on that peak ever since. He looked up at her, and the recognition was immediately followed by something else. "You're not supposed to be—" "The woman in Bay 7 isn't presenting with standard trauma," Emily said. She didn't raise her voice or change her tone, just stated it the way she'd state a blood pressure reading. "She has periapical bruising consistent with extended high-altitude exposure gear. Her breathing pattern is irregular in a specific, non-anxiety-related way that suggests pulmonary microcontusions from rapid decompression. The fluids you've ordered will increase her intracranial pressure risk. She needs—" "I don't know how you got in here," Fenwick said, standing. "But you no longer work here. Harlan already—" "I know what Harlan did. I'm telling you that your patient is going to code within the next 90 minutes if you keep her on the current protocol, and that if she codes, Delia will go on record about what she flagged, and you'll have a documentation problem." She watched his face. "I'm not trying to take your case. I'm trying to tell you what I see." A long pause. Something moved in his expression that wasn't quite concern, but was in the same neighborhood. "High-altitude decompression," he said. Dubious, but listening. "She came in by private vehicle." "I know how she came in. The tox was clean. Tox doesn't test for what I think she's been exposed to. You'd need to run a specialized panel, and you'd need to start it now because the window is closing." She held his gaze. "Call whoever you want about me afterward. Call Voss, call the board. But run the panel and adjust the fluid rate." Another pause. Longer. "What panel?" She told him. He wrote it down on the back of a coffee cup sleeve, which was either a good sign or a bad sign depending on how you chose to see it. She chose to see it as a good sign because the alternative was not useful. She walked back to the station and stood there for a minute, and then took her phone out and stared at the screen and thought about what she was doing and whether she could justify it. The woman had said, "Tell Renner." Emily knew only one Renner. She hadn't spoken to him in 3 years. She had his number in her phone under a contact labeled with nothing, no name, just a small symbol she'd never changed. She pressed call. It rang 4 times, and she was preparing herself for voicemail when the line opened and someone said, "What number is this?" Not a question, a test. "Kilo 7, Emily said. "Carter E. I have a situation." A pause. A different kind of pause than the ones in this conversation so far. "Where?" "Redwood Valley Medical Center, Ashford, Nebraska. I have a woman in my emergency ward." She stopped, corrected herself. "In the emergency ward. She asked for you. She has notation I recognize on her left forearm. I can read it." Another pause. In it she could hear something. An engine, she thought, ambient, moving. "Is she stable?" "Not particularly. I'm working on it." "Carter." His voice was level, but with something underneath it she couldn't quite name. "Don't let anyone leave that ward. Don't let anyone make calls you're not monitoring. And do not," he paused, "do not let them transfer her." "I don't exactly have authority here right now." "That's going to change," Renner said. "Hold position." He ended the call. She stood at the station with the phone in her hand for a moment and then pocketed it and turned back toward Bay 7. Behind her, she heard Delia say something sharp at the far end of the corridor, and then she heard footsteps, and then she heard Harlan Voss's voice. "Carter?" She turned around slowly. He was standing at the emergency entrance in his good coat, which meant someone had called him at home, which meant someone had told him she was here. He looked worse than he had at 8 o'clock, rumpled, unhappy, the professional certainty of the earlier encounter replaced by something more reactive. "You're trespassing," he said. "I'm standing in a hallway." "You were terminated. You were escorted. I walked out on my own, and I haven't been escorted anywhere yet." She looked at him. "You should know that the woman in Bay 7 is critically ill in a way your attending may have missed. I've flagged it. The appropriate tests are being ordered. When this is over, you'll want to be on the right side of that decision." "When this is over," his voice was flat. "Security." The guard from the front appeared at his elbow, looking uncertain, the way everyone looked uncertain when they were about to be asked to do something they had not been trained for. "Escort her out," Voss said. Emily looked at the guard. He was young, maybe 25, and had the wide-shouldered, slightly apologetic build of someone who'd played football in a small school and hadn't entirely figured out what to do with himself afterward. He met her eyes, and she saw the discomfort in them. "I'll go," she said, to the guard, not to Voss. "I'll walk myself out." She turned toward the emergency entrance, and she had taken 4 steps when every light in the ambulance bay went on at once, and she heard from outside the sound she had not heard in 3 years. The specific pitch and cadence of military rotors, not the civilian transport kind, not the news kind, but the operational kind, heavy, purposeful, and close enough that the windows of the emergency ward were beginning to vibrate. She stopped. Voss stopped. The guard stopped. The rotors got louder. Through the glass panels of the emergency entrance, Emily could see the ambulance bay. 2 black vehicles had pulled in from the street. Not civilian SUVs, not police cruisers, but the utilitarian, unmarked, specific purpose variety that she recognized at a gut level before her brain had finished processing the visual. 3 figures in the lead vehicle, more in the second. And above them, dropping toward the hospital roof, a helicopter that blocked out the security lights entirely as it descended, sending loose paper and a forgotten surgical mask skittering across the concrete. The doors opened and she felt the cold air. Voss said very quietly, "What is this?" She didn't answer him. She was watching the doors. The first soldier through was in civilian clothes, technically, but carrying himself with the posture that civilian clothes couldn't change. And behind him were 2 more. And behind them was a figure in a flight jacket she recognized before she saw his face, because she had spent 14 months working alongside him in conditions that made recognition a survival skill. Renner was taller than she remembered, or she'd forgotten. He scanned the ward in 3 seconds, the practiced sweep of someone who'd walked into worse rooms than this on shorter notice. And then his eyes found her and he crossed the ward without stopping, without looking at Voss, without any detour whatsoever. He stopped in front of her. Up close she could see the tension in his jaw, the controlled urgency of a man who had moved very fast to get here and was now moving very carefully. "You read it correctly," he said. Not a question. "Yes." "How long?" "She's been here about an hour. The attending was treating it wrong. I've corrected the course, but she needs— I know what she needs." He looked past her toward the corridor. "Which bay?" She told him. He turned to the 2 soldiers behind him and said something she didn't fully catch, and they moved. Then he turned back to her, and something shifted in his expression. Not softening exactly, but an acknowledgement of something. "You doing all right?" he said. She almost laughed. "I just got fired." "Yeah." He looked at her. "That's going to be a problem for someone." Behind her she heard Voss clear his throat, the sound of a man who has spent long enough in authority to believe it is a thing that persists across contexts. "Excuse me," Voss said. "I don't know who you people are, but this is a private medical facility, and you can't simply—" Renner turned and looked at him with the unhurried attention of someone who has exactly one thing to say. "Director Harlan Voss," he said. Not a question. "You're going to want to call your legal department." Voss stared at him. "I beg your—" "Right now," Renner said. "Tonight." His voice was still level, informational, because we're going to have a conversation, and you should not have it without representation. The ward was very quiet. Delia had appeared at the edge of the corridor. The medication cart nurses had stopped pretending. Even the family in the side room had gone still. Voss looked at Emily. His expression was trying to be authoritative and not quite getting there. She looked back at him and didn't say anything. Renner had already turned away. He was moving toward Bay 7, and the 2 soldiers had made a perimeter that was not aggressive but was absolute, and outside the helicopter had gone silent on the roof, and for a moment the only sound in the emergency ward of Redwood Valley Medical Center was the soft alarm from Bay 7 indicating that someone's vitals had just shifted. Emily followed Renner. She had a patient to help stabilize, a notation to fully decode, and somewhere at the back of her mind, the very specific kind of clarity that she'd only ever felt in moments when every pretense had finally been stripped away and what remained was just the work and who you actually were. The badge on the counter could wait. Everything else was just beginning. The alarm from Bay 7 was a single sustained tone, not the cascading sequence that meant cardiac, but close enough that the 2 nurses nearest the corridor had already pushed away from their stations before the attending had moved. Emily was through the curtain first. The woman— she still had no name, just the notation on her arm and the one word she'd said— had shifted position in the bed, turned partially onto her side, which was the worst thing she could have done given what Emily now believed was happening in the left lung. Her breathing had changed from the uneven cycle to something shallower and faster, the body making its own calculations about what was survivable. "She's compensating," Emily said to Renner, who had come in behind her. She tried to move. She's been trained to hold still through pain, which means she didn't feel this as pain until it was— She was already at the bedside, hands on the woman's shoulders, stabilizing without pressing, talking at the same time. Hey, look at me. I need you on your back. I know it's uncomfortable. Look at me." The woman's eyes found her, glassy but tracking. "There you go." Emily held her gaze. "Don't move. I've got you." Behind her, Renner said something low to one of the soldiers, and she heard the door open and footsteps move away in the direction of the supply corridor. Fenwick appeared at the curtain gap with the look of a man arriving late to a situation that had already organized itself without him. "What happened?" She moved and compromised her positioning. "I need a chest seal. Not commercial, the tactical variant. I need it in the next 4 minutes." Emily glanced back at him. "Do you have it in trauma storage?" "We have—" He stopped. "We have a standard set." That'll do. Also get me the panel results if they're back. Any of them. Anything at all." She turned back to the patient. "And close that curtain." Fenwick didn't move for a moment. Then he closed the curtain. Renner crouched down to the woman's eye level on the far side of the bed. He said her name, said it very quietly, said it the way you say a name when you need someone to understand they are specifically known and specifically found, and the effect was immediate. The woman's breathing didn't stabilize, but some of the panic underneath it did. Her hand moved slightly toward the arm with the notation. "I know," Renner said. "We have it. She swallowed. "The secondary. We know about the secondary. That's why we're here." He looked at Emily over the woman's head, and she read the question in it. "Give me 6 minutes," Emily said. "Then you can have her." She worked. Fenwick came back with the chest seal and the panel results, which were partial. 2 values returned, the rest still processing. And the 2 values that were back told her enough to confirm what she'd suspected, and also told her that Fenwick's protocol had been not just wrong, but actively dangerous. She didn't say this out loud. There wasn't time, and there was also no point in it. The damage was limited, the correction was possible. She focused on the correction. At some point during those 6 minutes, she became aware that the ward outside the curtain had gotten quiet in a way that wards didn't get quiet naturally. Not the quiet of slow hours or empty beds, but the specific quiet of a space where people are watching something they don't understand and have decided to be very still about it. She didn't think about Voss. She thought about the hand position and the seal placement and the second panel result and the fact that the woman's breathing was slowly coming back to the uneven but patterned rhythm that was bad but was not the alternative to it. "Okay," she said, at 6 minutes and some seconds. "Okay. You're going to be all right." She said it not because it was certain, but because it was possible, and possible was what she had to work with. The waiting room adjacent to the emergency ward had 6 plastic chairs, a television on mute showing a weather forecast for a different state, and a water dispenser that made a loud gulp every 40 minutes. Emily knew the room because she'd used it sometimes at the end of overnight shifts when she didn't want to go home yet, and couldn't justify staying on the floor, those liminal hours when the ward was quiet and she'd sit and drink bad coffee and let herself be nobody in particular for 20 minutes before going back to being whatever she was supposed to be. Renner put her in the room at 3:40 a.m. and sat down across from her and did not ask how she was doing, which she appreciated. "Mara Solins," he said. "That's her name. She's been under for 8 months. The operation is classified above my clearance level, which should tell you how seriously this is being taken." Emily absorbed this. The notation is an extraction code. You know what the 4th grouping means. Asset in danger, possible exposure. She looked at her hands. There was dried blood on one knuckle from where she'd caught herself on the edge of a monitor in the bay. She hadn't noticed it happen. What kind of exposure? The kind that gets people killed. He leaned back. She got out. I still don't fully know how, but she made it to Ashford, and she made it to the hospital, and she asked for you. She asked for you. She asked for both of us. She knows we work together. Whoever briefed her for the operation, and I don't know who that was, told her that if things went wrong, the 2 people to find were you and me. He paused. She found you first. Emily thought about the woman in the car, the private vehicle, the decision someone had made to go to a hospital rather than a contact point. The decision you made when the contact points weren't safe anymore. "What's the secondary?" she asked. Renner looked at her steadily. "That I can't tell you right now." "Renner, I mean it. Not because I don't trust you. Because if I tell you before the clearance goes through and anything goes sideways, you're exposed in a way I can't protect you from." He held her gaze. "The clearance is coming. It's been requested. Tonight. Tonight. Before morning." She sat with that. Outside, through the thin partition wall, she could hear movement, boots on linoleum, the controlled, purposeful movement of people who were there because something mattered, not because it was their shift. "Voss," she said, "is being spoken to." "By who?" "By Agent Carver." He said it simply, the way you say a name when the name is meant to carry weight by itself. She came in with the second vehicle. Emily hadn't seen the second vehicle clearly. She hadn't been looking at the second vehicle. "How bad is it?" she asked. Not about Voss specifically. About all of it. Renner looked at the wall for a moment, and in that pause she read things he wasn't saying. The gap between what he knew and what he was going to tell her, the calculation people in his position made constantly about what information was stabilizing and what information was destabilizing, and whether the person in front of you could handle the real version. She had worked 14 months alongside him in conditions that removed all the social texture from a person, which meant she could read the calculation in real time. "It's significant," he said, "and it involves this building. Misham." This is what nobody had told Harlan Voss when he'd taken the directorship at Redwood Valley 4 years ago. Institutions have weight, not prestige weight, not brand weight, but the actual accumulated weight of every decision ever made inside them. And that weight doesn't distribute evenly. It settles in specific places, on specific people, and eventually it becomes visible. Voss was in his office. He'd been in his office for 40 minutes, which he'd spent on the phone in the first 15, and then sitting very quietly looking at the surface of his desk for the remaining 25. The person across from him, Agent Carver, whose identification was federal and whose expression was the particular variety of patient that is actually the opposite of patient, had asked him twice to put his phone away. The third time, she'd simply reached across and turned it face down herself, and he'd let her, which told her something useful. "Let me explain how this works," Carver said. She was 41, which was younger than she looked if you went by her manner rather than her face, and she'd spent 11 years doing this specific kind of work, which was the kind where you walked into rooms where people had constructed very careful stories about themselves and began to dismantle the stories brick by brick. "I'm not here about tonight. Tonight is going to be what it's going to be regardless of what you tell me. I'm here about the 18 months before tonight, and specifically about 7 incidents that we've already documented, and about the relationship between this facility and a billing management company called Stroud Halcyon Partners." Voss was very still. "I want to give you an opportunity," Carver said, "to tell me your version of how that relationship developed. Because right now the version we have was assembled from other people's accounts, and it is not flattering to you. I would like to call... You've already called someone. I saw you on the phone. Whoever you called is not going to be able to help you in the way you're hoping, but that's a thing you'll figure out." She folded her hands on the desk. "The relationship, in your own words." A long silence. In it, somewhere in the building, Voss could hear it faintly, boots on stairs, more than one pair. "Patricia Stroud," he started. "You can start there," Carver said. "That works?" Emily didn't know what was happening in Voss's office. She knew that something was, because Delia had appeared in the doorway of the waiting room at 4 a.m. with the expression of someone who has been watching things happen and can't quite process the sequence. "They took his computer," Delia said. "Fenwick's too. They were very polite about it." "Sit down," Emily said. Delia sat. She was still in her scrubs, which meant she'd been here since her shift started and wasn't going anywhere. She was one of those nurses, the kind the system undervalued and depended on in equal measure. She'd been at Redwood Valley for 9 years and had filed 14 internal complaints in that time, all of which had been resolved in ways that changed nothing. "Am I in trouble?" Delia asked. "No. I called you when I wasn't supposed to." "You called a colleague because you had a patient who was being undertreated, and you were right about both things." Emily looked at her. "You're not in trouble." Delia let out a breath that had clearly been held for a while. "The woman in Bay 7, is she going to be okay?" "I think so. I can't promise." "What is she? Who are those people?" "I can't tell you that." "Can you tell me anything?" Emily thought about it. "You did the right thing, every step of it. Flagging the symptoms, calling me, pushing back on Fenwick. You did all of it right. That's going to matter." She paused. "That's going to matter on record." Delia looked at her for a moment. "You've done this before," she said. "Not nursing, the other thing. Whatever this is." Emily didn't answer that. "I'm not asking you to tell me," Delia said. Yeah, okay." She looked at the muted television. The weather forecast had been replaced by an early morning news program on a delay. The anchors bright and unreachable. "What do we do now?" "You go back out there and do your job. The patients who aren't in Bay 7 still need you." Emily stood. "I'll be in the corridor." At 4:23 a.m., the partial panel results became full panel results. And the full panel results were, from a documentation standpoint, an event. Fenwick was the one who brought them to Emily, which surprised her and then didn't. He was a man who'd made a mistake in front of witnesses, which was different from a man who'd made a mistake alone. And whatever else he wasn't stupid enough to dig in on the wrong side of this particular night. I ran the secondary panel, he said. The one you specified. The metrological cascade markers? Yes. He held out the tablet. I don't know what most of this means. I know. She took it and scanned the values. Several of them meant nothing without context. 3 of them, in the specific context she now had, meant a great deal. Fenwick, she said, when she came in, before I got here, did anyone photograph the notation on her arm? He frowned. I don't know. I didn't. Did anyone write it down? Any of the intake staff? I don't. He stopped. Triage might have. They document everything. I need the triage record from her intake, the full one, including any notes field. Carter, the patient is... She's classified. I know. I'm not asking about the patient. I'm asking about the triage record, which was created before anyone here knew what she was, and which may have information in it that should be secured. She looked at him steadily. If someone photographed that notation, and those photos are on a personal device, she watched him understand it. Right, he said. Right, He was already moving. She looked back at the panel results. The third marker, the one she'd been most concerned about, was elevated, which confirmed the decompression hypothesis, but also indicated something else that she hadn't fully worked out yet, a component that didn't fit the straightforward high-altitude exposure model. She looked at it for a long time. The number sat on the screen and did not explain itself. She went back to Bay 7. Marsolins was breathing better. Not well. Better. The chest seal had done what it needed to do, and the corrected fluid protocol had stopped the intracranial pressure from escalating, and she was currently somewhere between unconscious and asleep, which was the best available option. One of Renner's people was in the bay, a young man who introduced himself as Specialist Tate, and who appeared to have been assigned to stay within arm's reach of Solins indefinitely. Emily checked the monitors, checked the IV line, adjusted one setting by a small margin that mattered. You're her, Tate said. She looked at him. He was maybe 23, with the particular combination of youth and seriousness that showed up in people who'd chosen to do something difficult with their lives before they were fully equipped to understand what that meant. Carter, she said. You can call me Carter. Colonel Renner talks about you. He said it simply, not as flattery, just as information. What does he say? Tate looked at Solins, then back at Emily. He says if you're ever in a room with Carter, and Carter tells you something is wrong, believe her. She didn't have a response to that felt honest and appropriate at the same time, so she said nothing. She looked at the third marker value again, in her head, turning it over. Tate, she said, do you know what the secondary is? He was quiet for a moment. I know what I was briefed on. Is it in this building? Another pause, shorter. Ma'am, I can't. I'm not asking you to confirm anything. She kept her voice level. I'm asking you a yes or no question for my own safety assessment. Is the secondary situation physically present in this building right now? Tate looked at the floor, then at the ceiling. The behavior of someone who had been trained to not answer but hadn't been trained for the specific version of this question. He didn't say yes. He also didn't say no. She left the bay and went looking for Renner. Tob. She found him in the stairwell between the first and second floors, which was where people went when they needed to make calls they didn't want overheard by a ward full of alert and frightened staff. He was on his phone, standing against the wall with his weight on one shoulder, listening more than talking. She waited on the landing below him. He ended the call and looked down at her. The clearance came through, he said. That was fast. I told you before morning. He came down the stairs, stopped on the step above hers, which put him at eye level. The secondary is a data set, encrypted. She was carrying it physically, in a format I'm not going to describe to you in a stairwell, but it has to do with the operation she was embedded in, and specifically with what that operation discovered. About what? About a network. He said it carefully. A network of facilities, medical facilities, that have been used as pass-through infrastructure for financial transfers connected to several foreign-origin intelligence operations. The transfers are disguised as billing discrepancies, processing errors, the kind of thing that gets flagged and then quietly resolved and nobody looks at the resolution. He watched her face. Mara Solin spent 8 months documenting it. The data she's carrying is the documentation. Emily stood very still. How many facilities? She said. 23 confirmed, 41 suspected. He paused. Redwood Valley is on both lists. She thought about Stroud Halcyon Partners. She thought about the 14 complaints Delia had filed over 9 years, all resolved in ways that changed nothing. She thought about Voss saying when this is over in the tone of someone who believed they controlled the timeline. Patricia Stroud, she said. Renner looked at her. She's the CFO, Emily said. She's also Voss's direct superior and the named partner in a billing management company called Stroud Halcyon Partners. I don't know if that's on your list, but it should be. Renner pulled out a notebook. Old-fashioned paper, the kind she'd teased him about 3 years ago because nobody used paper anymore, and he'd said correctly that paper couldn't be remotely wiped. He wrote it down, looked at what he'd written, then looked at her. How long have you known about that company? I didn't know what it meant until 30 seconds ago. She held his gaze. I knew it existed because Voss mentioned it in a budget meeting I wasn't supposed to be in. He thought I was the cleaning crew. She paused. He always thought I was whoever would make him feel most comfortable in the room. Renner put the notebook away. Emily. She hadn't heard him use her first name in a long time. It landed differently than Carter. Not better or worse, just differently. The data Mara's carrying, he said. If it's complete, if it's what we think it is, it won't just implicate Voss. It'll reach into the board, into the billing apparatus, into the people who've been quietly managing these resolutions for years. He paused. That's going to be a problem tonight because those people are going to know something has happened, and some of them are going to start moving. Moving how? Covering, deleting, calling the right people and saying the wrong things. He looked at her directly. I need someone inside this building who knows it well enough to notice when something's being interfered with before it can be documented. Carver has the administrative section covered, but the clinical records, the billing interfaces, the internal systems, you need a nurse. I need someone who can walk anywhere in this building without anyone questioning it. She thought about the badge on the counter, Voss's badge, the one he'd told her to turn in. I don't technically work here right now, she said. No, Renner said, but you're still the best person in this building. He said it the way he said most things, factually, without ornament. The way she'd heard him say your positioning is better or your read was right in conditions where the truth was the only thing that mattered. And I think you know it. She looked at the stairs above him. The second floor housed medical records, the billing interface terminals, and Patricia Stroud's office, which Stroud used 3 days a week, and which was, Emily knew from 3 years of navigating around the people who shaped this building's decisions, connected by an internal network to 17 other administrative nodes across the facility. She also knew that Stroud had a keycard override that could access all of them. And she knew because she'd seen it once during a late shift when Stroud had been called in for an emergency and had used the nearest terminal without noticing who was standing behind her, where Stroud kept that keycard. Give me 20 minutes, Emily said. She went up the stairs without waiting for him to respond. Behind her, she heard him on his phone again, the quiet, authoritative cadence of someone repositioning assets. And she kept moving, up to the second floor, into the corridor that smelled like carpet cleaner and the particular institutional warmth of computer equipment left running through the night. The billing wing was dark. The motion sensors brought the lights up as she moved through them, one section at a time, the building revealing itself in increments. She passed the records office, past the administrative cluster, stopped outside Stroud's door. The door was locked. She hadn't expected otherwise. She stood there for a moment. Behind her, the motion sensor light clicked off, leaving only the glow from the exit sign at the far end of the corridor. In the semi-dark, she could see the keypad beside the door, a secondary override for facilities staff that most people forgot existed because it required a 6-digit code, and most people didn't know the code. She did. She knew it because she'd been in the facilities rotation for 3 weeks during a staffing crisis 18 months ago, and she'd been issued the code along with a master facilities key she'd returned and the code she'd simply retained, the way she retained most things. Not because she intended to use them, but because the information existed, and she was who she was. She entered it. The pad beeped green, the door opened. Stroud's office was neat in a way that was its own kind of statement. Not clean exactly, but deliberate, curated. The desk cleared of anything personal, the filing cabinet locked, the computer on with a screensaver running, which told her Stroud had been here recently enough that the computer hadn't slept. On the credenza behind the desk, in a ceramic dish that also held 2 promotional pens and a box of mints, was a keycard on a lanyard that Emily had seen once and not forgotten. She crossed the room, picked up the keycard, looked at it. Behind her, she heard the door open. She turned slowly. It was not Renner. The woman in the doorway was in her 60s, well-dressed for 4 a.m. in the way of people who dress as armor rather than comfort. And she had the expression of someone who had not been surprised in a long time, but was surprised now. Patricia Stroud looked at Emily and at the keycard in Emily's hand and at the open office door that should not have been open. "Who are you?" Stroud said. Emily held the keycard. "I work here," she said. Stroud's hand moved toward her jacket pocket. Toward a phone, Emily registered. Not anything else, just a phone. But the movement was fast and practiced, and in another life, Emily would have done the geometry differently. She said clearly and calmly, "Agent Carver is in this building right now. Harlan Voss has been speaking with her for the past 40 minutes. If you make that call, it will be observed, logged, and added to a federal documentation that has been accumulating for 8 months. Stroud's hand stopped. "I'm not here to search your office," Emily said. "I'm here for the keycard because there are billing terminals in this facility that need to be secured before anyone with access decides to clean them, and this card is the fastest way to do that." She held Stroud's gaze. "You can stop me. You can make your call. Or you can stand in this doorway and let me do what I came here to do and let the next few hours establish what actually happened here." Stroud said nothing. Her hand had dropped back to her side. She was looking at Emily with an expression that was trying to be contemptuous and landing somewhere closer to calculating. The look of someone running numbers in real time. "You're that nurse," Stroud said. "The one Harlan fired tonight." "Yes." "And you're the one who let soldiers into my hospital." "They didn't need my permission," Emily said. "But yes." The silence stretched. Through the window at the end of the corridor, Emily could see the first hint of something lightening at the edge of the sky. Not dawn, not yet, but the possibility of it. The horizon, remembering it, was supposed to do something eventually. Stroud said very quietly, "You have no idea what you've walked into." "I think," Emily said, "that I have a better idea than you'd like." She moved toward the door, past Stroud, and Stroud did not stop her. She moved into the corridor with the keycard in her hand and the lights coming on ahead of her, section by section, the building waking up around her. And then her phone buzzed once, sharply, with a text from Renner. 3 words. "She's not alone." Emily stopped walking. In the silence of the second-floor corridor, with the exit sign casting its red light across the carpet, and the motion sensor light above her humming back to life, she heard it. Not footsteps, not voices, but the very specific sound of a stairwell door on the far end of the building being held open by someone who did not want it to close loudly. She held the keycard and did not move and listened, and what she heard was not nothing. 2 seconds. She gave it 2 seconds, standing still in the corridor with the keycard in her fist, listening to the sound of someone who didn't want to be heard. Then she texted Renner back. "Second floor north stairwell. Don't come up. Watch the exit." She moved. Not toward the stairwell, away from it, back toward the billing wing, because if someone had come into the building through a secondary entrance and made it to the second floor without being intercepted by Renner's people, they weren't here by accident, and they weren't here for Emily specifically. They were here for what Emily was here for. The billing terminals, the records, the 17 administrative nodes that Stroud's keycard could access. She pushed through the door into the billing wing and hit the light panel, and the fluorescents came on in their slow, institutional flicker, and she moved to the first terminal and swiped the keycard and the screen unlocked. The interface was standard hospital billing. She'd seen versions of it before, had navigated it for routine documentation, knew the architecture well enough to understand that what she was looking for would not be in the standard patient billing section, but in the administrative reconciliation layer that most clinical staff never opened because it looked like a spreadsheet full of processing codes and meant nothing without context. She opened it. It meant something. The reconciliation files dated back 22 months. Some of the entries were routine. Some of them, when she looked at the vendor codes against the facility name in the header, were not routine at all. They were payments routed through billing categories that didn't correspond to any service the hospital actually provided, filed under a reconciliation subcode she didn't recognize. Dozens of them. Consistent intervals. The kind of consistency that didn't happen by accident. Her phone buzzed. Renner. 2 individuals, they went past the exit, still on 2. She typed back, "How long do I have?" His response took 9 seconds, which was long for him. Unknown. Carver's moving. She pulled up the screenshot function on the terminal. Not a standard feature, but a legacy function in the hospital's older software that IT had never removed because nobody used it and nobody had thought to lock it, and began capturing screens. Page by page, the reconciliation files moving forward, the dates advancing, the vendor codes repeating in their pattern. She was on the 7th screen when the door to the billing wing opened. The man who came through was not someone she recognized. He was mid-40s, in a jacket that was wrong for the building, too clean, too purposeful, not a visitor's rumpled overcoat, and not a staff member's scrubs. And he had the particular quality of movement she'd learned to read a long time ago, the economy of someone who'd decided in advance what they were going to do and was now executing it. Behind him was a woman, younger, who was already looking at the terminals rather than at Emily. Emily did not stop taking screenshots. "Step away from the terminal," the man said. His voice was not loud, not aggressive, the tone of someone who expects compliance because they have always received compliance. "In a minute," Emily said. "Now." She captured the 8th screen, 9th. The federal investigators in this building already know about these files. Stepping away from this terminal doesn't change what's in it. It only changes whether I've documented what's in it before someone with administrative access decides to clean it. She looked at him directly. "Which I'm guessing is why you're here." The man looked at the woman behind him. A quick look. The kind that carried a full sentence. The woman moved toward the 2nd terminal along the wall. "Don't," Emily said to the woman in a different tone. Not the calm she'd used with the man, but something lower and more specific. "Don't touch that one. The access log on that terminal is currently being mirrored to an external server, and any interaction with it is being captured in real time." This was not entirely true. It was approximately 40% true. Renner had told her in the stairwell that Carver's team had deployed a monitoring protocol on the building's network, and she didn't know exactly which terminals it covered. But the woman didn't know what Emily didn't know. The woman's hand stopped. The man was looking at Emily with a different expression now. Still controlled, still the economy of movement, but something behind the eyes had shifted. The recalculation of someone who'd walked into a room expecting one kind of problem and found another kind. "Who are you?" he said. "I work here," she said, which was technically the same answer she'd given Stroud and was becoming, in its repetition, its own kind of dark comedy. She captured the 12th screen. The reconciliation files were now into the most recent quarter, and the pattern was not only consistent, it was accelerating. The intervals had shortened. The amounts had increased. Whatever this was, it had been getting faster in the months before tonight, which meant either the operation had been scaling up or someone had been getting less careful. Her phone buzzed against her hip. She didn't look at it. "The files you're capturing are protected under," the man started. "Under what?" She looked at him. "What are they protected under? Tell me, because I've been a nurse in this building for 3 years, and I would genuinely like to know what legitimate protection you think applies to a reconciliation file showing payments to non-existent vendors, and whether that protection is something you want to explain to the federal agent who is currently in the administrative wing 1 floor below us." A silence. It had a different quality than the earlier silences. Less calculating, more, she didn't want to say afraid, but something adjacent to it. The door behind them opened, and Specialist Tate came through it, and behind him was someone Emily didn't know. A woman in a federal jacket who moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this specific thing before and found it boring in the way that only comes from competence. "Hands," the woman said to both of the people near the terminals. Not loudly, just clearly. The man complied. The woman beside him, after a half-second, did too. Emily captured the 15th screen. 16th. She kept going until there was nothing left to capture, and then she removed the keycard from the terminal and held it and looked at what she'd collected. 22 months, 47 irregular entries, a pattern that repeated with the precision of something designed by people who believed they were too far inside the system to be seen. She sent the screenshots to Renner's secure number, and then she sent them to Carver's number, which Renner had given her in the stairwell, and then she leaned against the terminal for a moment and let herself feel the particular exhaustion of the last several hours all at once. Tate appeared at her elbow. "You all right?" "Yes," she said, which was again approximately true. Downstairs, Mara Solins had stabilized enough that Renner had allowed a secondary assessment, and the secondary assessment confirmed what Emily's panel results had suggested. The decompression injury was real but manageable, and the more immediate threat had been the error in initial treatment, which had been corrected before it became irreversible. The third marker Emily had flagged, the one that didn't fit the standard model, turned out to be a pre-existing condition, a minor structural anomaly in Solin's pulmonary tissue that she'd apparently known about and accounted for in her operational planning, which was the kind of detail that told you a great deal about the person it belonged to. Emily sat with her for 20 minutes while the ward moved around them. Solins was awake. Not well, but awake. The particular alertness of someone operating on discipline rather than energy, burning the reserve. "You read the notation," Solins said. Her voice was rough. "Yes. Where did you learn that convention?" "The same place you did, probably." Emily looked at the monitor. The values were holding. "Different unit, same training framework." Solins was quiet for a moment. "They said you'd left." "I did leave." "The work." "Yes." Emily adjusted the blanket. 3 years ago." "Why?" She looked at Solins directly. It was a personal question from a woman she'd met 6 hours ago, and she was tired and the ward was loud with things happening in all directions, and the honest answer was complicated in the way that most true things were complicated. "Because I needed to see if I could do something that didn't require me to be what I'd been trained to be." "And?" "And I could. Mostly." She paused. Tonight was an exception. Solins almost smiled. Almost. "You're better than mostly." "You don't know that." "I know your file." Solins' voice was steady, matter of fact. "Renner made sure of it. Before they sent me in, he made sure I knew exactly who was in Ashford, just in case." She shifted slightly, not quite a wince. "I wasn't going to need you. That was the plan." "Plans," Emily said. "Yes." Outside the curtain, she could hear Carver's voice, the controlled cadence of someone moving from room to room, collecting, organizing, building the structure of what was going to become a case. She could hear Voss somewhere further away, his voice risen now, the professional certainty cracked enough to show what was underneath. She could hear the ward doing what wards do, alarms and movement and the low-level noise of people trying to keep other people alive, which went on regardless of everything else. "The data," Emily said. "Is it intact?" "Yes." Solins said it without hesitation, which meant she knew. "They didn't reach it." A pause. "I made sure of that before I got in the car." Emily nodded. She thought about the man in the billing wing, the woman moving toward the terminal, the thing they'd come here to do and hadn't managed to do. She thought about the 15 minutes between Renner's text and Tate coming through the door, and what those minutes had required of her, and whether she'd handled them correctly. She thought she had. She wasn't certain. She was rarely certain, which was one of the things that made her good at the things she was good at. "Get some sleep," she told Solins. "Real sleep. You're safe." "That's a big word," Solins said. "Tonight it is." Emily stood. "Tonight it counts." At 5:55 a.m., Patricia Stroud made a mistake. It was not a dramatic mistake. It was the quiet kind. The kind that looks like composure and reads as guilt only when you're looking for it. She had been in her office since Emily had taken the key card, and she had not left, and she had not called anyone. Emily had confirmed this through Tate, who'd had eyes on the corridor. And this restraint had, for a while, looked like wisdom. What it actually was, Carver determined later, was calculation. Stroud had spent those 2 hours not calling out, but typing. A long, careful message to an encrypted communication platform accessed through the hospital's own network, which was either very smart or catastrophically short-sighted, depending on how much she knew about what Carver's team had deployed on the building's network infrastructure. She did not know enough. Carver came into the billing wing at 6 a.m. and put the transcript on the table in front of Emily without comment. Emily read it. It was addressed to someone identified only by an account number, and it was written with the plausible deniability of a person who had spent years learning how to say things without technically saying them. But the content, the references to timing, to records, to the situation with Halcyon, and the need to move the reconciliation schedule forward, was clear enough in context. "When was this sent?" Emily said. 5:17 a.m. Carver looked at her. 40 minutes after you took the key card. She waited to see if you were going to come back and then sent it. A pause. She watched you leave the office and made a decision about which threat was more urgent. She decided the records were more urgent than me. She decided you were handled. Carver said it without inflection, but there was something in it, not satisfaction, but the recognition of a specific kind of irony. She's not going to be the only one who's made that mistake tonight. Emily thought about Voss at 8 p.m. Turn in your badge. You're done here. The absoluteness of it. The complete absence of doubt that she was, in fact, done. What happens now? Emily said. Now I finish what I came here to do. Carver picked up the transcript. Your screenshots were good, by the way. Very thorough. I've done documentation before. Different kind of documentation. Carver's expression was unreadable in the specific way of people who've trained themselves not to be readable, but something in it wasn't entirely professional. Renner told me about the overseas work, one of the actions you were cited for, the Kralov extraction. She paused. I know that case. It's used in training, the field decision you made in the 4th hour of that operation. She looked at Emily directly. You were right, and you made the call, and 6 people are alive because of it. Emily said nothing. That particular event lived in a part of her that she'd spent 3 years putting walls around, and Carver's mention of it had the effect of a sound heard through a wall, present but muffled, reaching her in a form she could manage. I know it's not why you stayed in Ashford, Carver said, but I want you to understand that what happened here tonight, the panel, the screenshots, the billing wing, that's the same thing, different room, same call. Emily looked at the transcript in Carver's hand. Is Stroud in the building? She said. Currently, yes. And the board? Emily said. The people she was referring to in that message, are any of them here? 2 of them are. Carver said it carefully, watching Emily's face. They arrived in the last hour, separately. They appear to believe they're here to manage a hospital administration crisis involving an unauthorized military incursion. She paused. They don't yet know what we have. Emily held that for a moment. When do they find out? When I'm ready. Carver moved toward the door. Which is soon. She left. Emily stood in the billing wing alone for a minute, in the space that the conversation had vacated. The terminal screens were dark now, the logged-out interface showing only the hospital's screensaver. A photograph of the building in summer, trees in full leaf, the sky the kind of blue that didn't look real. She'd driven past this building before she'd ever worked in it and thought it looked like a place things could be fixed. She'd been partially right. At 6:34 a.m., Renner found her in the stairwell, her stairwell, she was starting to think of it, and said, Fenwick's making noise. She looked up from the step she'd been sitting on. What kind of noise? The kind where he's telling anyone who'll listen that his clinical decisions were appropriate and any deviation from his protocol tonight was unauthorized. Renner sat down on the step across from her. He's also said your name twice in a way I don't like. He's covering himself. Yes. And the way he's covering himself involves a version of tonight where he did everything correctly and you interfered. She thought about Fenwick's face when she'd handed him back the panel results. The moment where she'd read correctly, that he was the kind of man who processed wrongness through his ego before he processed it through his conscience. She'd hoped the latter would win. It appeared the former was putting up a fight. Delia documented it, Emily said. She flagged the inadequate treatment before I arrived. That's in the triage record. I know. Renner looked at her. I'm not telling you this because it's going to work. I'm telling you because Fenwick talked to a board member who came in this morning, and that board member has apparently decided that having a narrative about an unauthorized nurse causing disruption is more useful than the alternative. Which board member? Holt. Jeffrey Holt. He arrived at 6, which is 20 minutes after Stroud sent that message. Emily stood up. He's one of them. Renner looked at her, not confirming, not denying, just looking. Carver said 2 board members came in this morning, Emily said. Holt is one of them. The other one is either cooperating or doesn't know yet. She ran through what she knew about the board's composition, which was not extensive but was not nothing. Meredith Tabb. She's been on the board for 6 years, and she and Holt have been... Emily. Renner's voice was careful. We're going to handle Holt. I know. But if Fenwick's narrative gets to Tabb before Carver does, it won't. You don't know that. No, he said honestly. I don't. He stood up too, which put them at the same level in the stairwell, the same narrow vertical space where things had been getting clear in increments since 3 a.m. What do you want to do? She thought about Tabb. She'd met her once, briefly, at a staff recognition event 2 years ago that Emily had attended, not because she wanted to, but because her unit manager had strongly implied attendance was non-optional. Tabb had been one of those board members who appeared at those events because she genuinely wanted to be there, which was different from the ones who appeared because it was useful. She'd asked Emily questions about the overnight nursing rotation. Specific questions, not polite ones, the kind that came from actual curiosity about the job. She'd sent a small acknowledgement card 3 weeks later about a patient outcome Emily had been involved in. Emily had thought, at the time, that this was unusual. Now she thought it might be relevant. I need to talk to her before Holt does, Emily said. That means going to the boardroom. I know where the boardroom is. Carter. He said it in the tone he'd used once before, in a different kind of field, when she'd been about to do something necessary that had a real chance of going wrong. Don't. He stopped. Be careful what you say in that room. I know. She paused. Do you trust me? I've trusted you since Kralov, he said simply. She went up the stairs. Yant. The boardroom was on the 3rd floor, and the door was closed, and from behind it she could hear 2 voices. Holt's, and one she didn't recognize immediately. She knocked once and pushed the door open before anyone answered. Jeffrey Holt was 62 and had the particular authority of men who've lived long enough inside institutions to mistake the institution's power for their own. He was at the head of the table with a coffee cup and a tablet, and the expression of someone interrupted mid-plan. Beside him was the woman Emily didn't recognize. Not Tabb, someone else, younger, who looked like a legal assistant or a communications person, who had that specific positioned quality of someone brought in to manage a message before the message had been fully defined. Meredith Tabb was on the other side of the table, and she was the only person in the room who looked at Emily without hostility or calculation. She looked at her with the expression of someone who has been waiting for something to arrive and cannot yet tell if this is it. This is a private meeting, Holt said. The hospital's charter requires board sessions dealing with operational crises to include clinical representation, Emily said. This was technically accurate, a bylaw she'd read once in a board moment and retained. I'm the senior clinical staff member with documented involvement in tonight's events. I'm that representation. Holt looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at the young woman beside him, who said nothing. You were terminated, he said, by Director Voss, who is currently under federal questioning. She said it calmly, the way she'd say any clinical fact. His administrative authority is in question. The termination standing is therefore in question. I'm happy to sort that out later. She looked at Tabb. Ms. Tabb, I need 3 minutes. Tabb looked at Holt, then back at Emily. She had the expression of someone making a decision with insufficient information and insufficient time, which was, Emily knew, the most common circumstance in which real decisions got made. Jeffrey, Tabb said, would you give us a moment? Holt said sharply, "Meredith." "A moment." Tab's voice didn't change in volume, but something in it did. "Please." The pause that followed was the pause of a man who had miscalculated the room. Holt looked at the young woman beside him. She looked at the table. He stood, took his coffee cup, and left, pulling the door not quite shut behind him. Emily sat down across from Tab. "You have 3 minutes," Tab said. "Tell me the actual truth." And somewhere below them, in the stairwell, Emily's phone lit up with a message from Carver that she wouldn't see for another 7 minutes. A message with 3 words that meant the investigation had just moved from contained to uncontainable. The kind of movement that doesn't reverse. The kind that takes everything it finds on its way through a building and holds it to the light. She told Tab the truth and did not know yet what was happening 1 floor below her. She would find out very soon. The truth, when Emily told it, took 11 minutes. She'd said 3 and gone longer, and Tab had not stopped her. She told it without drama and without the kind of careful self-presentation she might have used in a different room with a different audience. She told it the way she gave a handoff report at the end of a shift, sequentially, specifically, with the relevant values and the decision points and the outcomes. She told it about this woman in Bay 7 and the notation and the panel results and the billing terminal and the 22 months of reconciliation files and the 2 people who'd come in through the north stairwell and what they'd been moving toward. Tab listened without interrupting. She had a legal pad in front of her, and she wrote on it, not continuously, but at specific moments. The moments when Emily gave a detail that was precise enough to be useful. The handwriting was small and quick, and she didn't explain what she was writing. When Emily finished, Tab looked at the legal pad for a moment. Then she looked up. "How long have you known about Stroud Halcyon Partners?" she said. "I've known it existed for about 8 months. I've known what it was for approximately 3 hours." "And you documented the reconciliation files before anyone with administrative access could touch them?" "Yes." Tab looked at the pad again. "Jeffrey Holt has been on this board for 9 years, she said. He and Patricia Stroud have worked together in some capacity for most of that time. She said it without inflection, the way you state a thing you've known for a while and have been filing in a specific mental folder labeled "Not Yet." "I've had questions about certain financial decisions for the past 2 years. I filed 2 separate requests for independent audits." She paused. Both requests were tabled. By Holt. By a majority that Holt assembled. She closed the legal pad. "The audit would have found exactly what you found." Emily looked at her steadily. "I know." Outside the boardroom door, she could hear footsteps, the quick, purposeful kind, coming up from the stairwell. Not Renner's. Carver's, she thought, or Carver's people, which meant the message she still hadn't read was already in motion. She pulled out her phone, read it. The 3 words were, "Halcyon account frozen." She looked at Tab. "The federal investigation has frozen the Stroud Halcyon accounts. As of approximately," she checked the timestamp, 6:41 a.m. Tab absorbed this. Her expression did not change dramatically, but something behind it did. The shift of a person who has been carrying the weight of an unresolved thing and has just felt some portion of it lift. Not all of it. The part that lifts first is never all of it. "What do you need from me?" Tab said. "I need you to understand that Holt is going to try to construct a version of tonight where the clinical disruption, my presence here, my involvement in the patient's treatment, was the primary problem. He's already talked to Fenwick. He'll use whatever Fenwick gives him to build a liability argument around me that redirects attention from the billing records." She held Tab's gaze. "I need you to be the board member who already has the legal pad." Tab looked at what she'd written. Then she nodded, once. The particular nod of a person who has made a decision and is done deliberating. The door opened. Holt came back in, which he wasn't supposed to do, and behind him was Fenwick, which was a choice Holt had apparently made in the corridor, to bring reinforcement, to come back changed in number if not in position. Fenwick had the look of a man who'd been talked into something in the last 10 minutes, and was already slightly uncertain about it, which was a look Emily knew how to read. "This conversation is over," Holt said to Tab. "We need to—" "Jeffrey." Tab's voice was quiet. The Stroud Halcyon accounts had been frozen by federal investigators as of this morning. A beat. Long enough to see it hit him, the information landing in a face that had been arranged for a different kind of mourning. That's... He stopped. Started again. That's a separate matter from the operational issues tonight. The board's concern right now is the unauthorized... The board's concern, Tab said, should be that 2 members of its administrative leadership are currently under federal questioning and a third, yourself, arrived at this hospital at 6 a.m. following an encrypted communication from one of them. She opened the legal pad to the page she'd been writing on. I've been documenting this conversation since it began. I'd like you to tell me while I'm writing what you were told in that communication and who sent it. Holt went very still. Emily watched him. Watched the thing that happened in the faces of people who had spent a long time inside the certainty of their own position when that certainty encountered a surface it couldn't pass through. It wasn't collapse, not yet. It was the recalculation, the rapid, silent inventory of what was known and what was documented and what could still be managed. I think, Holt said slowly, that I should call my attorney. Yes, Tab said. I think you should. Fenwick, who had been standing slightly behind Holt with the posture of someone who'd arrived at a party and immediately understood he'd been given the wrong address, looked at Emily. His expression was complicated in the specific way of men who know they've made the wrong call and aren't yet sure how wrong. Emily looked back at him. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. He left without being asked to. Holt took out his phone and stood in the corner of the boardroom, and the conversation he'd expected to have in this room was over in a way it was never coming back from. At 7:15 a.m., Patricia Stroud was escorted from her office by 2 federal agents and a Redwood Valley security officer who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The escort went down the main corridor of the 2nd floor, past the administrative cluster, past the records office, past the door to the billing wing that still had the light on inside it. Several staff members were in the corridor at that hour. The morning shift had started at 7, and the morning shift didn't know everything that had happened overnight, only that there were federal vehicles in the ambulance bay and a military helicopter on the roof, and a sustained, unspecific tension in the building that had the overnight staff looking hollowed out and the incoming staff looking uncertain about whether they'd arrived at the right place. Stroud walked the corridor the way she'd always moved through the building, with the carriage of someone who believed the space arranged itself around her. The carriage held for most of the corridor. At the end of it, where the hallway turned toward the elevator bank, it didn't hold, because at the turn was Delia Okafor, coming off the night shift with her bag over one shoulder and her scrubs still on, and Delia had filed 14 complaints over 9 years and had been looked through every time, and she looked at Patricia Stroud now with an expression that wasn't triumphant. It was too tired for triumph, too specifically personal for triumph, but it was clear. Stroud looked away first. Emily was not in the corridor. She heard about it from Delia later, who told it simply and without embellishment, and whose voice had a particular steadiness in the telling that Emily understood was not detachment but the opposite of it, the kind of careful control you use when something means more than you want to show in public. Emily was in the emergency ward. She was with a patient who had nothing to do with tonight, a man in his late 60s who'd come in with chest pain at 6:30 and who needed someone to sit with him while his family was being located because the morning was complicated and the ward was short-staffed, and this man had been waiting 20 minutes and was frightened in the specific contained way of people who have decided being frightened is not useful and have made that decision through gritted teeth. She sat with him. She checked his vitals. She talked to him about something she saw on the muted television in the corridor. A nature program about coastal birds that she knew nothing about but invented commentary for, which made him almost smile, which was the point. She was still sitting with him when Renner appeared at the bay entrance. She held up one finger. He waited. When the man's daughter arrived, red-eyed, slightly breathless, coat still on, Emily handed off clearly and completely and stepped out of the bay. "Mara's asking for you," Renner said. "How is she?" "Better than she should be, honestly." He paused. "Carver has the data, the physical data. Mara handed it over an hour ago once the clearance confirmed." "Is it what they needed?" "It's more than what they needed." He said it quietly. "Emily, it's comprehensive. 8 months of it. It names Stroud. It names Holt. It names 4 contacts in the billing network and 2 external parties who've been receiving payments for. It's going to be a long investigation. A year, maybe more. But the foundation is there. She thought about Mara Solins in that car, driving to a hospital in a city she'd identified as a specific node in a network she'd spent 8 months mapping, with a physical data set secured against her body and an extraction code written in permanent marker on her own forearm, because the contact points weren't safe and the backup wasn't certain, and what was left was the most basic version of the plan. Get to a place where there are people and stay alive long enough for someone to find you. She knew I was here, Emily said. She knew you'd left the service. She knew you'd landed in Ashford. It was in the operational briefing as a secondary resource, an asset in proximity. He looked at her. She decided proximity was enough. She almost didn't make it. No, she almost didn't. He was quiet for a moment. That's because of Fenwick's initial treatment, and because of Voss removing you from the building, and because of approximately 45 minutes during which the right person was not in the right room. I got there. You got there, he agreed, not because of luck. She didn't respond to that. She looked at the ward, the morning shift moving through it, the board on the wall with its list of bays and statuses, the medication cart in its correct place, the coffee someone had made that was already half gone. The ordinary operation of a place that did necessary work, going on underneath everything else. What happens to the building, she said. The hospital itself. That depends on the board, which is now substantially different from what it was 3 hours ago. He glanced at her. Tab has called an emergency session. She's the acting board chair as of this morning. Holt is not, and the remaining members are being briefed by Carver's team right now. One by one. Yes. To see which one's new. Yes. He said it evenly. It's going to be a long morning. She nodded. A long morning after a long night, in a building that was sorting out which parts of itself were salvageable and which parts had been rotted through, and that sorting would take time it hadn't asked for and produce results that would be hard to look at. That was how it worked. That was always how it worked. She went to see Mara Solins. The bay was quieter than it had been. The ward around it was not quiet. The morning had its own noise, its own particular register of activity, but the bay itself had settled into something slower. Specialist Tate was still there, seated now, with a cup of coffee he appeared to have procured from somewhere, which meant someone on the nursing staff had decided he was acceptable enough to offer coffee to, which was its own small sign of normalization. Solins was sitting up, not straight. She was using the adjustable back of the bed for support, and her color was still not right, but her eyes were clear. You held the terminal, she said when Emily came in. How do you know about that? Tate. Solins glanced at him. He looked at the wall. He texted Renner. Renner told me. It wasn't complicated. It was just documentation. That's what it always is, Solins said, right up until it isn't. She shifted carefully. Sit down. You look like you've been standing for 8 hours. Closer to 9. She sat. The chair Tate had pulled up for himself was the only one in the bay, so she took the edge of the supply cart, which was not comfortable and was exactly as comfortable as she needed, uncomfortable enough to keep her from relaxing into the tiredness she was running on top of, which, if she let it, would close her eyes. Tell me about the notation, Solins said. Where you learned it. That's a long story. I have some time. Emily looked at her. At the arm with the notation, which was covered now by the sleeve of a hospital gown, but which she could still see in her mind's eye. The sequence, the 4th grouping, the last 4 digits. I spent 14 months on an overseas assignment, Emily said. Operational medical support. The notation convention was used by the embedded intelligence unit we worked with. It's a field code, originally designed for situations where verbal communication wasn't safe and written English was a liability. Alphanumeric, built on a rotating key that both units carried. She paused. I learned it because I was treating their people and they were treating mine, and we needed to communicate without using anything that could be intercepted and read. And you remembered it. I remember things I've learned under pressure. She considered. It's not a skill I cultivated. It's just how my memory works in certain conditions. Renner said the same thing about you. Emily looked at her. He said you were the best field medic he'd worked with, Solon said, because you remember everything while it's happening and you don't freeze. She paused. He said the thing that made you exceptional was that you knew the difference between a decision that couldn't wait and a decision that could. And you always knew which one you were in. Emily sat with that for a moment. Outside the curtain, the ward went on doing what it did. The morning rounds beginning, someone's call light pinging, the coffee machine in the break room cycling through its startup sequence. I left, she said. Whatever he told you, I left. That decision cost something. Everything does. Solons looked at her steadily. Doesn't mean it was wrong. I don't know if it was. No, Solons said. That's probably honest. She looked at the ceiling for a moment. For what it's worth, from someone who's been inside for 8 months and not particularly grateful for it, the outlook's pretty good from where I'm sitting. Emily almost smiled. The out has its complications. Name one. I just got fired from it. Solons did smile at that. A real one, unguarded, which shifted her face into something that looked much less like an operative and much more like a person who'd been through a hard thing and found a small absurd corner of it. At 8:40 a.m., Harlan Voss was formally removed from his position as director of Redwood Valley Medical Center. He did not leave quietly. That would have been the smart choice, and he'd been told so by the attorney he'd finally reached at 7 a.m., who told him in clear language that cooperation was the only thing that might, eventually, reduce the scope of what was coming. He'd listened to this advice with the expression of a man who'd spent his professional life operating in an institution that protected him, and he could not yet fully believe that the institution had stopped. He walked out of his office at 8:45, not in handcuffs, not yet, that would come later and in a different building, and into a corridor where the morning staff was moving through their rounds, and every single person who saw him came to the same conclusion within 3 seconds of seeing his face, because faces carry information that people read before they know they're reading it, and Voss's face in that corridor carried the information of a man whose carefully constructed position had been removed from under him. He saw Delia Okafor at the station. She was supposed to have gone home an hour ago and had not. He looked at her. She held his gaze, and she did not look away, and she did not say anything, and she did not need to. He walked past her and out of the ward. Emily was on the second floor when it happened, in the corridor outside Tab's impromptu board session, and she heard about it from 2 separate people within 10 minutes. The way news travels in institutions, which is faster than most official channels, and less accurately but with a greater degree of emotional detail. She sat down on the bench outside the boardroom and looked at the floor, and felt a tiredness that was not just physical, the specific exhaustion of a thing that has been held in tension for a long time and has finally resolved into something. Not clean. It was never clean. 3 years of small humiliations and 14 of Delia's complaints, and the patient in Bay 7 who'd almost died under a wrong protocol, and the 22 months of reconciliation files, none of that resolved cleanly. It resolved into a different situation, a better situation, one where the weight was distributed more accurately, but the weight itself didn't go away. Renner came and sat beside her. They didn't talk for a minute. He had a paper cup of coffee that he'd apparently gotten from somewhere, and he offered it to her, and she took it and drank some of it even though it was too hot and not very good. Mara's being transferred in 2 hours, he said, to a facility better equipped for the follow-on treatment. She'll be fine. I know she will. I'm going with the transfer. He paused. I'll be back in the area in a few days. There's going to be debrief. You'll be asked to come in. Carver's team will want a full account. I know the process. Yeah. He looked at the boardroom door. Tab's going to put your reinstatement through today. She told me this morning. Emergency board action. Full back pay for the overnight. The termination reversed. Emily looked at the paper cup in her hands. Voss's badge is still on the counter in the emergency ward. Your badge, Renner said. My badge, she said. Yes. Another pause. Comfortable, mostly. The kind that accumulated between people who'd been in difficult situations together and didn't need to narrate them. What are you going to do? He said. When this is sorted. She thought about it. Not the question he was actually asking. The question underneath, which was whether she was going to stay in Ashford, stay in the hospital, stay in the specific version of her life she'd been building for 3 years that had just been interrupted and was now, apparently, available to resume. Or the other thing, the thing she'd not been doing for 3 years. "I'm going to go back to work," she said. "The morning shift is short-staffed." He looked at her. "The man in Bay 2 came in at 6:30 with chest pain," she said. "He's stable, but his daughter's there and she looked scared. And there's a patient in Bay 4 whose IV line I've been thinking about since 9 p.m. last night." She stood up, handed him back the cup. "The board session doesn't need me. The ward does." He looked up at her for a moment, and his expression was not proud exactly. Something quieter than pride. The recognition of someone who has known something about a person for a long time and is watching that thing be confirmed. "Go," he said. She went. The emergency ward at 9 a.m. was different from the emergency ward at 2 in the morning. Different light, different tempo, different faces. The overnight staff had mostly gone. Delia, finally, had left at 8:30, swapping out with the day charge nurse in a handoff that apparently involved a detailed and significantly longer account than standard. The morning shift moved through the space with the particular efficiency of people who'd been briefed that something had happened overnight without being told all of it, who had arrived to find federal agents and a helicopter and a ward that was functioning but feeling not quite itself. Emily walked in through the staff entrance. The badge on the counter was still there. Voss had left it there when he'd taken her keycard in. She'd set it down and he hadn't touched it, and in the 12 hours since it had been sitting on the surface of the nurse's station, like an object that had been waiting for a decision to be made about it. She picked it up, clipped it to her scrub pocket, looked at the board. The day charge nurse, a woman named Torres, whom Emily knew mostly from handoffs and one department meeting where they'd agreed about a documentation problem and disagreed about the solution, came out of the break room with a clipboard and stopped when she saw Emily. "Carter," she said. "Torres." Emily looked at the board. "Where are we?" Torres took a moment. Processing, Emily read. The overnight had been a lot, and Emily walking in as though a normal shift were beginning was one more thing that required adjustment. But Torres was good at her job, which meant she was good at adjusting. Bay 2, 67-year-old, chest pain, daughters with him, waiting on cardiology consult, Torres said. Bay 4, post-op, IV's been sluggish all morning. Bay 6 is... "I'll start with 4 and 2, Emily said. "Give me the 4 chart." Torres handed it over. Emily looked at it. The IV notation was exactly what she'd expected. A documentation gap, a setting that had been adjusted once at 3 a.m. and not reevaluated since. She went to Bay 4. She was not thinking about Voss or Stroud or Holt or the billing terminals or the reconciliation files or the notation on Marisolin's arm. She was thinking about the IV line and why it was sluggish and whether it was a positioning issue or something at the site, and as she thought about it, she was already moving. The way she always moved on a floor, with the specific economy of someone who had done this long enough that the space organized itself around the work. She had been in the bay for 4 minutes when she heard Torres's voice from the station, and the voice had a quality to it. Not alarm, something more than that, a layer she couldn't name until she stepped out of the bay and saw what Torres was looking at. The television in the corridor. The one that usually played weather forecasts and morning programs on a delay, and that the overnight staff muted because they couldn't take another pharmaceutical commercial at 3 a.m. Someone had turned the sound on, and on the screen was a woman standing outside a hospital building that was not this hospital, reading from a statement. Emily recognized her. It was Carver, but Carver cleaned up, Carver with a federal seal behind her, and a microphone stand in front of her, which meant a press conference, which meant this was no longer the contained version of things. She turned up in time to hear the end of the statement. Investigation into financial misconduct involving multiple healthcare facilities operating in coordination with foreign origin financial entities. 14 individuals have been identified. Arrest warrants have been issued for 7. The investigation is active and ongoing. The ward had gone quiet. Not the quiet of inattention. The quiet of people who have understood at the same time that a thing is larger than they'd been told. Torres looked at Emily. "Is this..." She stopped. "Were you..." Yes, Emily said simply. Torres looked back at the screen. On the television, a reporter was asking a question that Carver answered in the same level, informational tone she used for everything, the tone that gave you the impression that the world was being handled. Emily's phone buzzed. The message was from a number she didn't have saved, a number with an area code she recognized as federal, which meant it was from Carver's office directly, rather than from Carver herself. The message was 6 lines. She read the first 2 and stopped. She read them again. The message said, "Preliminary review of Solin's dataset has identified a secondary financial structure within Redwood Valley Medical Center operating separately from the Halcyon network, smaller, older, predating the Halcyon connection by approximately 4 years." She read the next line. "The structure was established during the tenure of a prior director. We are attempting to identify the originating party. Current evidence points to a member of the clinical staff who was involved in the facility's administrative reorganization at that time." She looked at the name in the final line. She read it twice. Outside the bay window, the ambulance bay was bright in the early morning light, and the helicopter was still on the roof, and the federal vehicles were still in the lot, and the hospital was doing what it did. The necessary, ongoing, imperfect work of keeping people alive. And Emily stood in the corridor with her phone in her hand and the badge on her chest and looked at the name on the screen, which was a name she knew, and understood that the night was not over in the way she'd thought it was over. It had simply found a deeper room. The name on the screen was Fenwick. Not Harlan Voss, not Patricia Stroud, not Jeffrey Holt, who was sitting somewhere in this building with his attorney on the phone in the morning coming in through a window he'd stopped looking at. Martin Fenwick, attending physician, the man who'd been treating Mara Solins wrong when Emily arrived, the man who'd come to the boardroom with Holt at 6 a.m., the man whose face she'd read as guilt about a mistake and who had, apparently, been doing something much older and much more deliberate than a mistake. She stood in the corridor and read the rest of the message. The secondary structure had been running for 4 years, predating Voss's directorship, predating the Halcyon network, predating everything else that had happened in this building. It was smaller, the message said, operationally simpler, focused specifically on patient record falsification and the selective suppression of adverse outcome documentation, which served 2 functions. It protected certain physicians from liability exposure, and it generated clean data that could be sold to private insurance assessment firms who paid for it, because clean data made their actuarial models more profitable. Fenwick had built it. Fenwick had maintained it. Fenwick had, when the Halcyon network arrived and began using the hospital as a pass-through node, almost certainly provided the institutional cover that made the larger operation possible, because a facility with already clean documentation was a facility that didn't attract scrutiny. The message's last line said, "Dr. Fenwick is currently in the building. Do not approach. We are 20 minutes out." She put the phone in her pocket. Torres was watching her from the station, not asking, reading, the way good nurses read rooms and faces, accumulating information without requiring it to be offered. "I need you to tell me where Fenwick is right now," Emily said. "He finished rounds at 8. He's usually in his office by—" "Call the office. Don't go there. Just call." Torres picked up the desk phone without asking why. She dialed. She waited. "No answer," she said. Emily looked at the corridor map on the wall behind the station. The physician offices were on the 2nd floor, south wing, the opposite end of the building from the billing wing, the opposite end from where Carver's team had been operating since 4 a.m. The south wing had its own stairwell, its own exit to the parking structure, and a connecting corridor to the hospital's secondary ambulance bay that most staff used for nothing and most administrators had forgotten existed. She knew about it because she worked nights and nights required knowing every way in and out of a building. She sent Renner the single word, Fenwick, then the location, then south exit parking structure. His response came in 11 seconds. "On it. Don't move." She moved. The south stairwell was empty. The 2nd floor south corridor was empty except for a housekeeping cart parked outside a closed door and the specific institutional quiet of a part of the building that hadn't woken up to the morning yet. Fenwick's office was the 4th door. She knew it because she'd walked this corridor at the end of enough overnight shifts to have the geography memorized without intending to. The door was open. Not wide, Slightly, the way a door is when someone has moved through it in a hurry and not latched it properly behind them. She stopped outside it, pushed it open with 2 fingers. The office was in the early stages of being emptied, not dramatically. No overturned drawers, no obvious ransacking. The desktop had been cleared of personal items. The filing cabinet was open, one drawer pulled out, several folders displaced in the way they're displaced when someone has taken specific ones and left the rest. The computer was on, screensaver running, which meant it had been accessed recently. She came in, looked at the computer without touching it, looked at what was left on the desk. One folder, not taken. She opened it. Medical records, patient records, multiple, going back 18 months with correction notations on each one. She recognized the correction format. It was the hospital's standard adverse outcome amendment form, which was used when an initial outcome assessment needed to be revised. The revisions in these records were systematic, and they all moved in the same direction, which was from worse to better, from outcomes that would trigger insurance review to outcomes that wouldn't. She took a photograph of the top 3 pages with her phone. Then she closed the folder exactly as she'd found it. She went back to the door and into the corridor and down to the stairwell and down to the first floor and out through the connecting corridor toward the secondary ambulance bay. She heard them before she saw them. Renner's voice, not raised, but with the specific carrying quality it had in operational conditions, the voice that didn't need volume because it was calibrated to cut through noise without creating it. She came around the corner into the secondary bay. Fenwick was there. He had a bag, the kind of bag you kept packed for a thing you'd been considering for a long time. He was standing next to a car that was not his usual car, which meant he'd thought about this too, and the fact that he'd thought about it and still hadn't managed to be gone told her something about the gap between how much time he'd believed he had and how much he actually had. Renner was between him and the parking structure exit. 2 of Renner's people were to the left. A third was at the connecting corridor door behind Fenwick, which was the door Emily had just come through, and which Fenwick turned toward when she appeared and then turned back. He looked trapped. He looked, underneath the trapped, like a man who was exhausted in the specific way of people who have been maintaining something for a long time and have finally been relieved of the maintenance. The exhaustion not of emergency, but of duration. "Dr. Fenwick," Renner said, "put the bag down." Fenwick put the bag down. He did it without the resistance she might have expected from a man who'd been building something for 4 years. Quickly, cleanly, the way you put down a thing you've already stopped believing in. He looked at Emily. She looked back at him. She thought about the conversation in the break room at 3 a.m., him with his coffee and his phone, the patient in Bay 7 deteriorating under his care. She thought about how he'd looked when she'd corrected the protocol. Not angry, she remembered now. Something else. Something she'd read as wounded professional pride. She understood now it was fear. Not of her. Of what she might see. "You knew what she was," Emily said. "When Solins came in, you recognized something." He didn't deny it. "I knew what the compression suit was," he said. "I didn't know what it meant for the rest of it. I didn't know how far. I didn't know it had gotten to where it got." He stopped. His voice was controlled but thin. "I thought if I treated her as standard trauma and she stabilized, whatever she was carrying would go unexamined. I thought I could." "You thought you could keep it small," Emily said. "I thought I could keep it contained." He looked at her. "The same thing I'd been doing for 4 years. Renner said quietly, "Federal agents are 3 minutes out. You're going to want to have had this conversation before they arrive, or you're going to have it on the record in a way you have less control over." Fenwick looked at the bag on the ground, then at the parking structure exit he wasn't going to reach, then at nothing in particular. "I didn't hurt anyone," he said. "The records I adjusted. Those patients were not harmed by the adjustments. You suppressed adverse outcomes," Emily said. "You hid the documentation that would have triggered reviews that would have caught preventable errors. You don't know whether those patients were harmed by what you covered, because covering it was the reason nobody looked." She held his gaze. "You don't get to decide the damage was limited. That's what the reviews were for." He had no answer to that. Not because he was stupid. Fenwick was not stupid, which was part of what made this what it was, but because the answer didn't exist. She was right, And he knew she was right, and he'd known it for 4 years and done it anyway. Which is the thing about the quiet, long-running wrongs. They're not committed in moments of pressure or fear. They're committed in small, deliberate choices made in the confidence that nobody is watching closely enough to see. The federal agents arrived at 2 minutes and 40 seconds, which was faster than Renner had estimated. Carver was not with them. She was still at the press conference, still answering questions in the level, informational tone. But her people were, and they were efficient, and Martin Fenwick was out of the secondary ambulance bay and into a federal vehicle, while the regular ambulance bay was still managing its morning traffic, the world of the hospital going on in one register while this other thing resolved in another. Emily stood in the secondary bay after the vehicle left and felt not satisfied exactly. Something more complicated than satisfied. The feeling of a thing that has been in the wrong configuration for a long time and has been moved into its correct one, but which still carries the marks of how long it was wrong. She went back inside. At 11 a.m., Meredith Tabb called an all-staff meeting in the main conference room, which was the largest interior space in the building and which still wasn't large enough. People stood at the back and in the doorway, and the overflow watched on a monitor in the corridor, and Tabb stood at the front of it without notes because she'd been thinking about what to say since 6 a.m., and she knew it. She said it plainly. No management language, no institutional softening. She said that the hospital had been operated for a period of years by people who had used it for their own purposes in ways that harmed patients, staff, and the building's mission. She said that those people were gone, and that their removal was the beginning of something rather than the end, and that the beginning was going to require everyone in the room. She said that a nurse named Emily Carter had done something the night before that had required courage of several different kinds, and that the board had voted unanimously in an emergency session at 9 a.m. to reinstate her with full back pay, a formal apology in writing, and a commendation for clinical excellence. Emily was standing at the back of the room. She had not been warned this last part was coming, and when she heard her name, she did not look at the people looking at her. She looked at the floor for a moment, and then at the wall, and then, because looking away from the room felt like its own kind of statement, at the room. Delia was in the third row. She had come back. She had gone home at 8:30 and apparently returned by 10, which was not a thing anyone had asked her to do. She was still in her civilian clothes, her coat over her arm, and she was looking at Emily with the expression of someone who is trying not to cry in a professional setting and is mostly succeeding. Emily held her gaze, gave her a small nod, the kind that carries a full sentence. Delia nodded back. The commendation letter came to her office at 1 p.m. She had an office now, small, shared with 2 other senior nurses, with a window that looked at the parking structure, which was not a view anyone would call inspiring. She read the letter once and put it in the drawer and went back to work because there were 4 patients on the floor who needed things, and the afternoon shift was coming in short again. At 2:30, she got a call from Renner. He was with the transfer team, Mara Solins, in transit, and he called to tell her that Carver's team had completed the initial evidence compilation and that the number of facilities involved in the Halcyon network had been revised upward, 41 confirmed, which was the high end of what they'd originally suspected. Fenwick's cooperation is going to accelerate the secondary investigation, Renner said. He gave them the other physicians involved in the record falsification network, 4 of them, 2 at this facility, 2 at other hospitals in the region. Is he cooperating to reduce charges? Obviously. Will it work? Partially. A pause. He's still looking at significant time. The falsification ran for 4 years and covered 61 patient records. The sentencing guidelines on that are not sympathetic. She thought about the folder on his desk, the correction notations, the systematic movement from worse to better, 61 times. Good, she said. Not with heat, just factually. Voss and Stroud are looking at federal fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction. Holt is cooperating in exchange for a reduced charge. He was peripheral, according to Carver. Useful, but not central. Renner paused. The external parties named in Solin's data set. That's a longer road, international elements. But the domestic network is comprehensively documented. And Mara. She's going to be fine, I told you. I know. I wanted to hear it again. A brief pause. "She's going to be fine," he said again, differently. The repetition as its own kind of care. After she hung up, she sat in the small shared office for a while. The parking structure window was uninspiring, but the light through it in the early afternoon was actually decent. The angle was right, the October sun low enough to come through straight. She hadn't noticed that before. She'd never been in this office in the afternoon. She thought about what Renner had said in the stairwell that morning. That's the same thing. Different room. Same call. She wasn't sure she agreed. The overseas work and this, they weren't the same thing. Not in the way he meant, not in the way that would make a tidy narrative about who she was and why she'd done what she'd done. The truth was messier than that. She'd left one life because it had cost her things she couldn't keep paying. She'd built another life that was quieter and smaller and controllable in ways the first hadn't been. And then a woman had arrived in a compression suit in the middle of the night, and the quiet, controlled version of herself had recognized something and moved before the deliberate version had finished deciding. That wasn't heroism. That was just wiring. The way certain people are built, which isn't a virtue so much as a fact, and which can be used or not used but doesn't go away. The thing she'd actually chosen was not to be the person she was. It turned out you couldn't choose that. What you could choose was the room you were in when the choice showed up. She'd been in the right room. At 4 p.m., she went to Bay 7. Mara Solins was gone, transferred as planned to a better-equipped facility. Specialist Tate was gone. The bay had been cleaned and reset, the bed made, the monitors cleared, all evidence of the night removed in the efficient and slightly eerie way that hospital spaces reset themselves, ready for the next thing. She stood in it for a moment, the clean, empty space. Then she went to Bay 2 and checked on the 67-year-old man with chest pain whose name was Harold, and whose daughter had finally gone home to get clothes and would be back by 5. The cardiology consult had been completed. His numbers were better. He was watching something on the small television mounted to the wall and muted the sound when she came in. "You're the one who was here this morning," he said. "Early." "Yes." "I heard your name in the meeting." He looked at her the way people look when they've been in a hospital bed long enough to have a lot of time to observe the humans coming through. Seemed like a big deal. It was a complicated night. "You don't look like someone who had a complicated night." She looked at him. "What do I look like?" He thought about it. "Someone who did what they were going to do regardless." He said it simply, the way old men sometimes say things that younger people would dress up more. That's either a very good thing or a very tiring one. "Both," she said. "Usually both." He nodded, like that confirmed something he'd already decided. She checked his chart, adjusted nothing because nothing needed adjusting. Told him his daughter would be back by 5, which she could see he already knew, but liked hearing anyway, because that was one of the things this job had taught her. People don't always need information. Sometimes they need the information said aloud by someone who is paying attention to them. She said goodnight to Harold and went back to the floor. The evening shift came in and Emily did the handoff with Torres, who did it efficiently and without excess, and at the end of it paused for a moment. "For what it's worth," Torres said, "the IV in Bay 4. You were right about the positioning." "I usually am about positioning," Emily said. "I'm wrong about other things." "Aren't we all?" Torres picked up the chart. "See you tomorrow." Emily got her jacket from the shared office and walked out through the emergency entrance into the early dark of an October evening in Ashford, Nebraska. The ambulance bay was clear. The federal vehicles were gone. The helicopter had lifted off the roof at noon, and without it the building looked like what it was. A large, imperfect medical facility in a mid-sized city between two ridgelines, doing necessary work for the people who needed it. She stood on the sidewalk outside the entrance for a minute. The same sidewalk she'd stood on at 8:47 p.m. the night before, with the cold coming in and the October air, and the decision to put one foot in front of the other and go home and let it be what it was. 14 hours. A lot had fit into them. She thought about what Tab had said in the all-staff meeting, that the removal of the people who'd corrupted this place was a beginning, not an end. She believed that. Beginnings were harder than endings most of the time. They required more of you. They didn't come with the relief that endings came with, only the requirement to keep moving. But this was worth keeping. She'd almost lost it last night. Not the job, Not the badge, but the thing the job was actually about, which was the 11 minutes with Harold and the IV in Bay 4 and Delia in the corridor and the 67-year-old man who'd asked what she looked like and said, someone who did what they were going to do regardless. She hadn't saved the hospital. She'd done her job in a specific situation where her job required more than the standard version. That was a meaningful distinction, and she was going to hold on to it, because the version of this story where she became the hero who rescued an institution was a version that would eventually require her to be something she wasn't. Elevated, smoothed, made into a lesson rather than a person. She was a person. She was tired. She was a combat medic who'd become a nurse, who'd been dismissed by a man who didn't see her, who had done what she could with what she had in the hours she'd been given. That was enough. More than enough. It was, in fact, everything. She started walking toward her car. There is a particular kind of strength that doesn't announce itself, that doesn't wear its history on the outside, that moves through the world in scrubs or civilian clothes and gets told you're done here by people who mistake their authority for insight. It is the strength of people who have been tested in rooms that don't appear on any record, who carry knowledge they can't explain without exposing things they've chosen to protect, who have learned that being underestimated is not a wound unless you allow it to be, that it is sometimes simply a fact about the other person. Emily Carter had been underestimated by the same building she walked back into and saved. She had been dismissed, escorted to the edge, handed back her own silence as though it were evidence of her smallness. What it had actually been was patience, the particular patience of someone who knows what they're capable of and is not in a hurry to prove it to anyone who hasn't earned the right to know. She walked to her car. The city of Ashford sat in its crease between two ridge lines, the lights coming on as the dark settled in, the hospital behind her lit and functioning, the work going on. Always the work going on. She drove home through the route that avoided the school zone. She made tea. This time she drank it,